already here. So let's just go on to the third question here, I think,
Hmm.
which is a question I really like, um, from JD over in ANZ, going all acronyms for this question. He says, how can international players highlight themselves more to get drafted or even get into the interview process without playing in the US market pre-draft, just focusing on the player and what they bring as a person and a skill set, not including visa hurdles? I have a lot of thoughts on this, but Len, why don't you start with this as a guy who
Yeah.
has drafted, very much so, an international player in years past.
Yeah. And unfortunately for that player, he wasn't able to make it over due to the circumstances of the times. But
2020 COVID draft days.
2020 COVID, yeah. But needless to say, there was other international players that I've spoken to from that day till present time. And I do feel like there are talented players. So, in which this question is sort of asked, I think there's sort of a narrative that it's the international player's fault. And I don't really think the basis in which the league is formatted that it's necessarily the international players' fault. I think even with the international players that we've seen get into the league, I'm not sure if there's been full-fledged trust within their circumstance as far as to maximize their play style within the role that is needed on the team. But even beyond that, the logistics to, you know, get a visa and a work visa and get over to the States in time to get prepared for the league. And next thing you know, you're already headed back home because 6 months moves so fast. Just all these certain things. Um, I think it's actually extremely tough for the international prospect to be acknowledged in a sense. And so in which this is asked where it says, how can international players highlight themselves more? I mean,
It's tough. It really
it's
is
it's
tough.
tough. I don't want to put it
And
on the international guys, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no. And JD himself has done a good job kind of helping, international players with the ANZ Prime League over there. It's tough in a philosophical sense. Um, I'll answer it by saying that it's about it. It honestly goes back to the first question, Bear's question about how do guys not get drafted, because at the end of the day, it's just how did another sort of category of players not get drafted? No ANZ guys or APAC guys or EU guys drafted, this year. Um, it comes down to availability, but not just in the sense of playing. Like, the time differences make it so tricky for even late night. Everyone in the prime community is a night owl, but it's getting your games seen not just by managers who actually do a solid job. Again, not everyone, but a lot of them, more than we think, do a very solid job. Watching international games. It's also getting players on board, getting established league players, because they're the ones who might say, all right, actually, if they get a chance to watch, an Australian player, we'll just take a random example, right? They might say, okay, this guy's actually pretty good. And then they're more bought in. Len kind of mentioned the trust issues that may have been had previously with international players. Like, getting player buy-in is so important for any set of teammates and any team in general to function, that getting player buy-in when you're already at a disadvantage, which international players are. International here, we mean, different continents here. Obviously, Canadian players are also, international, but they have it a bit easier, i.e., a lot easier, because
But
they're in
can
the
I?
same server. Yeah, jump in.
Why are they? Why is it a bit easier? You just said it. They're in the same server,
They're in the same circle.
and
They're
so
in the same server. That's the
yeah,
key. That's why the
yeah.
availability thing is critical, because if you assume that you're not going to be able to play in the games, which chances are you won't unless it's the combine or you actually go to the US or North America in general, in preparation for the draft, I think just if you can, being in players' streams, right? Let's say we'll just use Bear because we talked about Bear a bit. If you're in Bear's stream and just active in the comments, or you're interacting with them a little bit on Twitter, and obviously don't overdo it, but I think that creates a little more name recognition, which could turn into more check-ins on your stream, as it were, by players who then might go back to their front office and say, "Hey, this guy's pretty good. Let's interview him. Let's keep an eye on him, etc." But it is difficult, and it's not really, the international players' fault, as Len said. And I mean, if we're being honest, It's very unfortunate that there are no six players um, in the league, because that would create opportunity to kind of, I'm not going to say gamble on players, because it's not a gamble, because a lot of international players are very good and could play in the league. But it's more a sense of, all right, the devil versus the devil you don't know. Known players, known quantities are just seen as safer, and that's not necessarily how it should be. But if you've seen a guy play 4,000 pro-am games over the course of a pre-draft, right, you have more of a comfortability with that player than with a player you might have seen 40 games of.
Yeah,
And
and
again, I like international players a lot. I think they could play in the league. I interviewed some and pushed for some, but it's tricky, and it's tricky for every prospect. This is just a unique set of challenges for international players here.
yeah, and I would just say more so like when looking at like I do think those are favorable recommendations to engage and try and create a network within players. But again, I don't know the possibility of finding trust within the current format of competitive players unless you're playing against these guys. That's how you garner respect within this league, within this esport. Like the only real way, because even then, if you're just watching ANZ Pro Am and it's two ANZ teams and they're going against each other every time, there's really no gauge as to where the skill level is there for players to acknowledge. Okay, this guy's actually doing some things. Whereas like Harry, for instance, NBL point guard, he has a great opportunity to create that trust within himself because he's going to be a point guard within the league. What whether the trust is there or whatnot already. But you know what I'm saying? I think it's just more
Yeah,
so. It's okay to say, hey, you can network more and do these type of things, but in my opinion, I don't know if there's a way beyond
beyond
getting
coming
on the
over and
same
playing.
server.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's tough. The one other thing I'll say, and this is kind of on in a different angle, I would say that international players are really good, but they also don't quite, in a sense, understand that it's such a fit thing after a certain point yet, in the way that North American players who happen to have more access to league players already do, in the sense that, yes, there are a lot of great international players, some who could well have been drafted, maybe should have been drafted. But the complaints that I've seen, and I could be wrong, the complaints that I think I've seen have largely focused on deeming that the narrative problem is the skill set. The narrative problem isn't necessarily the skill set, it's the comfortability, it's the individual fit, that hasn't really been mastered. And that, again, as we said for question one, is kind of so important, and almost more important at the end of the day. That's kind of the next hurdle. And I think, as Len said, Harry, the NBL point guard, it, hoping he does well. I think he will do well. He can really have an impact on this question as a whole. And it's unfortunate that he kind of has to be representative of this, as opposed to just getting to do his job and play the game. But if he succeeds, I think that'll be a great sign for ANZ Prime, and hopefully international Prime
I
as a whole.
and I just want to say one more thing. There's a prospect who started to garner quite a bit of interest headed into the draft. He actually lived in Ireland until he was about 13, and then but he was playing 2K Pro Am over here, and now he's 18. I think he just turned 19. The other is Ado, the
Mm-hmm.
lockdown prospect. He's not thought of as like a European prospect or something like that, like it's because he was identified on the American server. So I don't even think it's a necessarily a thing of being like a EU prospect or ANC prospect. I think it's just more so being within the current format on the same server against all the other best perceived players, and then proving yourself on that spectrum. And so
Yeah.
I think that's really just what it is. I hate that it's got to be something that's so drastic and expensive and life
Mm-hmm.
changing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's quite a ask to ask of these prospects. But
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any other way to get around it.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. As I feel like I've said so many times, it's tough.